Hey, Michael, is that the only shirt you own? The voice belonged to Brandon Chen, the most popular kid in 7th grade at Westfield Academy, one of Manhattan's most elite private schools. Michael Parker stopped walking, debating whether to ignore him or respond. But before he could decide, Brandon and his friends had already surrounded him in the hallway. Wait, you're right. He wore that same shirt yesterday, didn't he? Another boy chimed in, eyes gleaming with malicious amusement. Maybe he doesn't wash his clothes. Does your family even have a washing machine? The group erupted in laughter. Michael looked down at his shirt. It was clean. His grandmother made sure of that, washing it by hand every night. But it was old, worn thin from years of use. And no amount of careful washing could hide that fact. The collar was frayed, the color faded. Wait, I bet he can't afford new clothes. Isn't he on the free lunch program? Brandon leaned in with an exaggerated look of pity. Poor thing. You know what? My mom throws away clothes all the time. I could bring you some hand-me-downs if you want. The cruelty in his voice was thinly veiled behind false generosity. The other students laughed even harder. Michael said nothing. He'd learned that responding only made things worse. He tried to walk past them, but Brandon deliberately shoulder-checked him. Where are you going? To get your free lunch? Brandon sneered. Oh wait, you probably get your clothes from the donation bin too. How convenient. Free food, free clothes. Must be nice living off charity. The laughter followed Michael down the hallway. He clenched his fists, feeling the familiar burn of humiliation rising in his chest, but he kept walking. Behind him, he heard their voices continuing. Imagine being that poor. It must be genetic or something. I know, right? My dad says poor people just don't work hard enough. I hate sitting near him in class. It's like poverty is contagious. Each word was a knife, but Michael had developed thick skin over the 2 years. He'd attended Westfield Academy. He was there on a full scholarship, awarded for his exceptional test scores and straight-A grades. The school loved to tout him as their diversity success story in brochures, but inside these walls, he was treated like he didn't belong. Michael's parents had died when he was 6. A car accident that left him orphaned and alone. His grandmother, Dorothy Parker, took him in without hesitation. She was 68 then, already retired from her nursing career. But she refused to let her grandson suffer. She started a small business selling sandwiches and prepared meals at the local market, working from dawn until dusk to provide for Michael. Thanks to her sacrifice, Michael could attend a good school and take extra tutoring classes. But that success came at a cost. Westfield Academy wasn't just expensive. It was a world designed for the children of tech executives, investment bankers, and celebrity families. Michael's presence, with his second-hand clothes and free lunches, was a constant reminder to everyone that he didn't fit in. The discrimination wasn't always overt. Sometimes it was subtle, the way teachers called on other students first. The way group projects somehow always formed without including him. The way no one ever invited him to birthday parties or weekend hangouts. Other times, like today, it was brutal and direct. But nothing could have prepared Michael for what was about to happen in the cafeteria. When lunch period arrived, students flooded into the spacious dining hall. Unlike most public schools, Westfield Academy's cafeteria looked more like an upscale restaurant, with modern furniture and a menu that changed daily. Students laughed and chatted with their friends, completely at ease in this environment. Their tuition fees afforded them. Michael stood in line quietly, holding his tray. He'd learned to make himself invisible during lunch. Keep his head down, sit alone in the corner, eat quickly, and leave. It was safer that way. As he reached the front of the line, he showed his student ID to the lunch lady. She smiled kindly at him and began loading his tray with food. It was the one moment of kindness he experienced most days. There you go, sweetheart. Make sure you eat it all, okay? Thank you, ma'am. Michael took his tray and headed toward his usual spot in the far corner. But Brandon had other plans. As Michael walked past his table, Brandon stood up and made an exaggerated show of looking at Michael's tray. Hey everyone, look, Michael's getting his free lunch again. Must be nice, eating on taxpayer money. His voice carried across the cafeteria, and conversations stopped as heads turned toward them. My parents pay tens of thousands in taxes. And this is where it goes? Feeding freeloaders? One of Brandon's friends added, laughing. Michael kept walking, trying to ignore them. Just get to your seat. Just sit down and it'll be over. Why don't you just pack lunch from home? Oh wait. Brandon's voice dripped with mock sympathy. You probably can't afford groceries either. The cafeteria erupted in laughter. Michael's face burned with shame, but he kept moving. Almost there. Just a few more steps. That's when Brandon made his move. As Michael passed him, Brandon deliberately stuck out his foot. Michael didn't see it coming. His shoe caught on Brandon's ankle, and suddenly he was falling. The tray flew from his hands, sailing through the air in what felt like slow motion. Then came the crash. The tray hit the floor with a deafening clang. Food exploded everywhere, pasta splattered across the tile, salad scattered in a wide radius, milk pooled around Michael's knees. The entire cafeteria fell silent. Michael knelt on the floor, frozen in humiliation. His pants were soaked with milk. Food covered his hands, and the entire student body was staring at him. Oh my God, look what you did. Brandon's voice broke the silence, suddenly aggressive. You got sauce on my shoes. These are $300 sneakers. Do you know how much these cost? Probably more than your grandmother makes in a month. The cruelty was breathtaking. Michael looked up at Brandon, who was making a show of inspecting his perfectly clean shoes. There wasn't a drop of food on them. It had all been a performance. That's when Michael noticed Mr. Harrison, the history teacher, standing just 10 feet away. Michael made eye contact with him, silently pleading for help, for justice, for someone to acknowledge what had just happened. Mr. Harrison looked at Michael for a long moment. Then he simply turned and walked away, as if nothing had happened. As if a student hadn't just been deliberately tripped and humiliated in front of the entire school. As if Michael didn't exist at all. The message was clear: you're on your own. Michael slowly stood up and began picking up the pieces of his spilled lunch. His hands shook as he gathered the tray and ruined food. No one helped. No one said a word. They just watched, some with pity, most with amusement, a few with outright contempt. As he carried his empty tray to the return station, he heard Brandon's final comment, "Can you believe it? Gets free food and just wastes it like that. Ungrateful." More laughter followed Michael out of the cafeteria. He made it to the bathroom before the tears came. Locked in a stall, he finally let himself cry, not from the physical pain of falling, but from the crushing weight of being invisible, unwanted, and utterly alone in a place that was supposed to be safe. That afternoon, Michael trudged home through the streets of Queens, his backpack feeling heavier than ever. The subway ride had been long, and his still damp pants clung uncomfortably to his legs, a constant reminder of the lunchtime humiliation. By the time he reached the small apartment he shared with his grandmother, exhaustion had settled into his bones. He opened the door quietly, hoping to slip into his room unnoticed. The last thing he wanted was for his grandmother to see him like this and ask questions. He didn't want to answer. But as soon as he stepped inside and dropped his backpack, something broke inside him. Michael made it to his room and closed the door before the sobs came. He slid down with his back against the door, pulled his knees to his chest, and really cried in a way he hadn't allowed himself to at school. The tears came hot and fast. washing away the anger and shame and loneliness he'd been holding back all day. Why was this happening to him? What had he done wrong? He worked hard, got good grades, never caused trouble. But none of that mattered. To them, he would always be the poor kid. Someone to mock and belittle and push around. He didn't hear his grandmother come home. Dorothy Parker had spent another long day at the market. Her small food stand requiring her to be on her feet from 6 in the morning until 6 at night. Her joints ached, her back hurt, but she never complained. Every dollar she earned went toward keeping Michael fed, clothed, and in that expensive school that was supposed to give him opportunities she'd never had. She noticed immediately that something was wrong. The apartment was too quiet. Usually, Michael would call out, "Grandma, I'm home," the moment she walked in. Today, silence. "Michael?" she called softly, setting down her heavy bags. No answer. She walked to his room and heard the soft, muffled sound of crying. Her heart clenched. She opened the door gently and found her grandson curled up on the floor, shoulders shaking with sobs. "Oh, baby. What happened?" She lowered herself to the floor beside him, ignoring the protest from her knees, and wrapped her arms around him. Michael didn't answer at first. He just leaned into her embrace, finding the safety and comfort that had eluded him all day at school. "It's okay. I'm here. Tell Grandma what happened." Finally, the words came tumbling out, the constant mockery about his clothes, the comments about free lunch, the tripping incident in the cafeteria, the teacher who looked away. All of it poured out between gasping sobs. Dorothy held him tighter, her own eyes filling with tears. She'd worked so hard to give him a better life, but she couldn't protect him from this kind of cruelty. Her heart broke listening to what her sweet, brilliant grandson endured every single day. "I'm sorry, Michael. I'm so sorry I can't give you more. If we had more money, you could have nice clothes like the other kids. You wouldn't have to. It's not your fault, Grandma." Michael pulled back and looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. "You work so hard for me. Those kids are just mean. They're wrong for treating people differently because of money." Dorothy cupped his face in her weathered hands. This child, who had every reason to be bitter and angry, was trying to comfort her. "You are such a good boy, Michael. Never let anyone make you feel less than what you are." "I won't, Grandma. I promise." He tried to smile for her sake, though his face was still wet with tears. "I'll be okay. Really." But Dorothy could see the pain in his eyes. And in that moment, she made a decision. Tomorrow, she would go to that school. She would talk to whoever needed to hear about what was happening to her grandson. Because while Michael was trying to be strong, someone needed to stand up for him. Someone needed to fight back. The next morning, Michael hoped yesterday's incident would be forgotten. Maybe the other kids would move on to someone else. Maybe today would be different. He was wrong. It was Field Day, Westfield Academy's annual track and field competition. Every class competed in various events, with the relay race being the grand finale and most prestigious competition. Being selected as your class's relay representative was considered a major honor. Michael was actually good at running. It was one thing he could do that didn't require money, just determination and practice. He'd been training during his free time, running through his neighborhood, building his speed and endurance. When tryouts for the relay team came up, he'd surprised everyone by posting one of the fastest times. Now, standing on the track with other potential relay runners, he could feel the hostile stares. Brandon and his friends stood in a cluster, whispering and pointing. "No way we're letting that kid represent our class," one boy said, loud enough for Michael to hear. "It'll ruin our reputation. Poor kid shouldn't even be in this school, let alone representing our class in the relay," another added. Brandon strutted over, his expensive athletic gear a stark contrast to Michael's worn gym clothes. "Hey, Michael. You know the relay spot is mine, right? Someone like you. You should stick to things more your speed. Like maybe sitting in the corner during lunch. The surrounding students laughed. Michael said nothing, just focused on stretching and preparing for the race. Let his running speak for itself. The gym teacher blew his whistle. All right, everyone to the starting line. The top 3 finishers will be our class representatives for field day. Michael crouched at the starting line, tuning out everything else. This was his chance to prove he belonged, to show he was just as capable as anyone else. The whistle pierced the air. Michael exploded forward, his legs pumping with all the strength he'd built up over months of practice. He could hear the other runners beside him, feel them trying to keep pace. But Michael was faster. He pulled ahead, his lungs burning but his determination unwavering. The finish line was just ahead. He was going to win. He was actually going to. A foot shot out in front of him. Michael's momentum carried him forward even as his legs tangled with Brandon's deliberately extended leg. He went airborne for a horrifying moment, then crashed hard onto the rubberized track. His knees hit first, then his palms, the impact sending shockwaves of pain through his body. He rolled to a stop, stunned. The other runners streamed past him. By the time he staggered to his feet, he'd gone from first place to last. Blood seeped through his torn gym pants where his knees had scraped the track. The watching students' reactions varied from shocked gasps to barely suppressed laughter. Brandon crossed the finish line first, arms raised in victory, not a hint of shame on his face. "Nice try, Michael," he called out, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Maybe next year." Michael limped toward the gym teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, who was recording times on his clipboard. "Mr. Rodriguez, Brandon tripped me on purpose. Can I run again, please?" Mr. Rodriguez looked up briefly, his expression unreadable. Then he shrugged. "That's part of the race, Michael. You have to be aware of your surroundings. Can't win every time." But he deliberately. "Michael, don't make excuses. Take responsibility for your performance. That's what champions do." Mr. Rodriguez turned away, effectively ending the conversation. Michael stood there, blood dripping down his shin, hands scraped raw, and felt something harden inside him. No one was going to help him. No one was going to stand up for what was right. He was completely alone in this. The worst was yet to come. That afternoon, Westfield Academy held its parent presentation day, a showcase where selected students presented projects to an audience of parents, teachers, and school administrators. It was a prestigious event, and being chosen to present was considered a high honor. To Michael's surprise, his homeroom teacher, Mrs. Henderson, had selected him as one of the presenters. He'd worked hard on his project about renewable energy solutions for urban environments, spending weeks researching and creating a detailed presentation. For once, he thought, maybe he'd be recognized for his academic achievements rather than his economic status. He'd prepared his presentation on a USB drive, using the library computers since he didn't have one at home. He'd practiced his speech until he had it memorized. He was ready, or so he thought. As the presentation time approached, Michael plugged his USB drive into the classroom computer while parents filled the seats at the back of the room. He opened the file folder where his presentation should be. It was empty. Michael's heart dropped into his stomach. He frantically clicked through folders, searching for his presentation. Nothing. It was completely gone. Behind him, he heard muffled laughter. He turned to see Brandon and his friends with barely concealed smirks on their faces. Brandon caught his eye and gave him a small, mocking wave. "Is there a problem, Michael?" Mrs. Henderson called from her desk, her tone already impatient. "My presentation. It's not here. I don't understand, I saved it." "Oh, for heaven's sake." Mrs. Henderson stood up, her face flushing with annoyance. "Michael, this is an important event. Did you actually prepare, or did you just hope to wing it? I did prepare. I swear, my presentation was. Enough excuses. Parents are waiting. Either present or sit down. The principal, Dr. Patterson, stood up from his seat in the back of the room. His face was red with embarrassment. Mrs. Henderson, is this really the student you selected to represent our school? This is highly unprofessional. The parents whispered to each other, their voices carrying across the suddenly silent classroom. Is this the scholarship student? Poor preparation reflects poorly on the school. My taxes pay for his education, and this is what we get. Michael's face burned with humiliation. He opened his mouth to try again, to explain what happened, but the words died in his throat. His hands were shaking. The entire room was staring at him with expressions ranging from disappointment to contempt. Michael, sit down. Mrs. Henderson's voice was cold. You're wasting everyone's time. But I said sit down. The finality in her voice left no room for argument. Michael walked back to his seat in complete silence, every eye following him. He could hear Brandon's quiet snickering, the disapproving murmurs of parents, the heavy sigh of the principal. He'd never felt more humiliated, more worthless, more completely defeated in his entire life. The moment the bell rang, Michael grabbed his backpack and ran. He didn't stop running until he was 3 blocks from school, his lungs burning and tears streaming down his face. Only then did he slow to a walk, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. All he could think about was getting home to his grandmother, the one person in the world who made him feel like he mattered, like he was worth something, like he wasn't a burden or a mistake. He needed her now more than ever. When Michael burst through the apartment door, tears streaming down his face, Dorothy was in the kitchen preparing dinner. One look at her grandson's face told her everything she needed to know. Michael, what? I can't do it anymore, Grandma. The words exploded from him. I can't go back there. They hate me. Everyone hates me. He collapsed into her arms, and the whole story came pouring out: the deliberate tripping during the race, the teacher who dismissed his complaint, his mysteriously deleted presentation. The public humiliation in front of all those parents. Dorothy listened to every word, her expression growing harder with each detail. When Michael finally fell silent, exhausted from crying, she held him close and made a decision. Listen to me, Michael. This ends now. Tomorrow, I'm going to your school. Grandma, no, it'll just make things worse. No. Her voice was firm in a way he'd never heard before. No more. What's happening to you is wrong, and someone needs to say it. I should have done this sooner. But they'll listen to me. Trust me on this, baby. They'll listen. There was something in her voice, a quiet confidence that Michael didn't understand. How could his grandmother, who sold sandwiches at the market, make a fancy private school listen to anything? But as he looked into her eyes, he saw a determination he'd never seen before. And despite everything, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe tomorrow would be different after all. The next morning, Dorothy Parker dressed in her best outfit, a simple but dignified navy dress she saved for special occasions. She looked at herself in the mirror, seeing not the elderly market vendor, but the confident woman she used to be, back when she was a head nurse managing entire hospital floors. She could do this. She would do this. For Michael. When she arrived at Westfield Academy, the imposing building seemed designed to intimidate. Glass and steel architecture, perfectly manicured lawns, luxury cars in the parking lot dropping off students. This was a world of wealth and privilege, a world where people like her were usually invisible. But Dorothy wasn't here to be invisible. She walked through the front doors with her head held high and approached the reception desk. I'm here to speak with Principal Patterson about my grandson, Michael Parker. The receptionist looked her up and down with barely concealed disdain. Do you have an appointment? No, but I need to speak with him today. It's urgent. I'm sorry, but Dr. Patterson is very busy. Perhaps you could schedule. It's about the ongoing bullying and discrimination my grandson faces at this school. I can wait as long as necessary. The receptionist's expression flickered with something concern, perhaps before she picked up the phone. After a brief, quiet conversation, she looked up with surprise. Someone will be with you shortly. Please have a seat. Dorothy sat in the lobby, her hands folded calmly in her lap despite the nervousness fluttering in her stomach. Students passed by, some giving her curious glances. She recognized a few faces from Michael's descriptions, including Brandon Chen, who smirked at her before disappearing down a hallway. 20 minutes later, a secretary emerged. "Mrs. Parker? Please follow me." But instead of being taken to the principal's office, Dorothy was led to a different part of the building, to the office of Dr. James Morrison, the school's board chairman. She hadn't expected this. The secretary opened a heavy wooden door. "Mrs. Parker is here, sir. Send her in, please." Dorothy entered a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the school grounds. Behind a large desk sat Dr. Morrison, a distinguished-looking black man in his early 60s, with silver-streaked hair and intelligent eyes that studied her carefully. "Mrs. Parker, please sit down." His voice was kind but carried authority. "I understand you're here about Michael." "Yes, sir. My grandson is being bullied and discriminated against because of our financial situation, and the teachers are either ignoring it or participating in it." Dr. Morrison leaned forward, his expression grave. "Tell me everything." And Dorothy did. She told him about the constant mockery, the tripping incident at the track meet, the deleted presentation. The teachers who looked the other way or blamed Michael for the abuse he received. She didn't cry, didn't plead, she simply stated the facts in a clear, steady voice. When she finished, Dr. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. "Please ask Principal Patterson and Mrs. Henderson to come to my office immediately. Tell them it's urgent." After he hung up, he looked at Dorothy with an expression that might have been respect. "Mrs. Parker, I want you to know that I take these allegations very seriously. If what you're telling me is true, and I believe it is, there will be consequences." Minutes later, Principal Patterson and Mrs. Henderson entered the office, both looking confused and slightly worried about being summoned by the board chairman. "Dr. Morrison, is something wrong?" Principal Patterson asked. "Sit down, both of you. Mrs. Parker has brought some very serious concerns to my attention regarding the treatment of her grandson." Both educators stiffened. Principal Patterson's face reddened. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Is it a misunderstanding that Michael Parker was deliberately tripped during relay tryouts and the gym teacher dismissed his complaint? Well, I don't know all the details. Is it a misunderstanding that his presentation mysteriously disappeared before Parent Day, and Mrs. Henderson publicly humiliated him in front of parents?" Mrs. Henderson jumped in. "Dr. Morrison, with all due respect, Michael has some behavioral issues. He doesn't connect well with other students, and his preparation for important events is sometimes lacking." "Stop." Dr. Morrison's voice cut through the room like a knife. "What you're describing is a child being isolated and set up for failure, and you're blaming him for it." Principal Patterson tried again. "Sir, we have many students to manage, and we do our best to treat everyone fairly. But the reality is that other parents contribute significantly to the school through donations and fundraising. They have certain expectations about the student body and what?" Dr. Morrison's voice was dangerously quiet. "Those expectations include allowing their children to torment a scholarship student? That we should prioritize donors' children over students who've earned their place through academic achievement." The room fell silent. Mrs. Henderson's face had gone pale. Principal Patterson looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Dorothy watched this exchange with growing amazement. Dr. Morrison wasn't just listening to her, he was actually taking her side, holding these administrators accountable. She'd never expected this. Dr. Morrison stood up and walked to the window, his back to the room. When he spoke again, his voice was heavy with disappointment. "Do you know why I care so deeply about this issue?" He turned back to face them. "Because 30 years ago, I was Michael Parker." Everyone in the room froze. "I grew up in poverty in the Bronx. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families. My father died when I was 6. I wore the same clothes until they fell apart. I ate free lunch at school when there was food at home to pack. I didn't even have that. And yes, I was bullied mercilessly for being poor." He walked closer to Principal Patterson and Mrs. Henderson, who now looked deeply uncomfortable. "The only difference between Michael and me is that I had one teacher, just one, who saw past my circumstances and recognized my potential. She fought for me, advocated for me, and helped me get a scholarship to college. Without her, I wouldn't be standing here today as the board chairman of this prestigious school." Dr. Morrison's voice grew harder. "And here you are, educators at a school I help oversee. And you're not just failing to be that advocate for Michael, you're actively participating in his marginalization." "Dr. Morrison," Principal Patterson began. "I'm not finished." The words were quiet but carried such weight that Patterson immediately fell silent. "Mrs. Parker, could you please tell them about your connection to this school?" Dorothy looked surprised. "My connection?" "Yes. Tell them about 10 years ago, when this school was in crisis." Dorothy's eyes widened. "You know about that?" "I do. Please, tell them." Dorothy took a breath and turned to face the principal and teacher. 10 years ago, this school was going bankrupt. You were about to lose accreditation and close your doors. I was part of a group of market vendors and small business owners who organized fundraisers throughout the community. We donated what we could. Many of us gave money we could barely afford to spare because we believed that our neighborhood needed a quality school. Principal Patterson's face had gone completely white. We raised over $100,000, Dorothy continued. It wasn't enough to save the school entirely, but it kept you running long enough to find other solutions. And every year since then, I've donated a portion of my earnings to help subsidize the school lunch program, so kids like Michael whose families are struggling can eat nutritious meals without feeling ashamed." Mrs. Henderson's mouth had fallen open. You're one of our anonymous donors?" "I didn't want recognition. I just wanted to help." Dorothy's voice was steady. "But now I'm here because my grandson, the boy I've sacrificed everything for, is being treated like garbage in a school I helped save." The silence in the room was deafening. Dr. Morrison let the weight of that statement settle before speaking again. "So let me ask you both, what kind of school have you been running?" "One where a donor who saved your institution is too ashamed to reveal her identity. Where her grandson is bullied for the very poverty that made her generous donation so meaningful. Where teachers and administrators care more about wealthy parents' comfort than creating an environment where all students can thrive." Neither educator could meet his eyes. "Here's what's going to happen," Dr. Morrison said with absolute authority. "Tomorrow, we're calling an emergency assembly. Every student, every parent available, every teacher and staff member will attend. And I'm going to tell them a story about what this school truly stands for, or what it should stand for. Mrs. Parker and Michael will both be there. And afterward, we're going to have a very serious conversation about your continued employment here." Principal Patterson looked like he might be sick. Mrs. Henderson's hands were shaking. "Am I understood?" "Yes, sir," they both mumbled. "Good. Now get out of my office and start thinking about how you're going to make this right." After they left, Dr. Morrison turned to Dorothy with something like admiration in his eyes. "Mrs. Parker, I apologize on behalf of this institution. What's happened to Michael is unconscionable, and it ends now. Dorothy felt tears prick her eyes for the first time since entering the building. Thank you. I didn't know if anyone would listen. Oh, I'm listening. And tomorrow, everyone else will too. He smiled slightly. Sometimes it takes someone with courage to shine a light on problems people would rather ignore. You did that today. As Dorothy left the building, she felt lighter than she had in months. Tomorrow would be difficult, she knew that. But for the first time, she had hope that real change was possible. For Michael. For all the kids who felt invisible and worthless because of circumstances beyond their control. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next morning, Westfield Academy's auditorium filled with an unusual buzz of confusion and speculation. An emergency all-school assembly had been called with less than 24 hours. Notice something that had never happened before in the school's 50-year history. Students filed into seats, whispering questions to each other. Parents who could take time off work sat in the back rows, equally puzzled. Teachers lined the walls, many looking nervous without understanding why. Michael sat with his grandmother near the front, his stomach churning with anxiety. Every eye seemed to be on him, wondering why he was sitting with a guest during a school assembly. Brandon and his friends sat several rows back, whispering and snickering, probably preparing new ways to mock him. Then Dr. Morrison walked onto the stage. The auditorium fell silent. Most students had never seen the board chairman before. He was a name on plaques and letterheads, not a real presence in their daily lives. But here he was, standing at the podium with an expression that commanded absolute attention. Good morning. I'm Dr. James Morrison, chairman of Westfield Academy's board of directors. I called this assembly because something has come to my attention that I cannot, in good conscience, ignore. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled crowd. Even from the front row, Michael could feel the weight of that stare. This school prides itself on academic excellence. We celebrate our test scores, our college acceptance rates, our athletic achievements. We post photos on our website of smiling, successful students and call ourselves a community of learners. But I'm here to ask you all a question. What does that excellence mean if we fail at the most basic principle of education, treating every student with dignity and respect? Uncomfortable shifting rippled through the audience. I want to tell you a story, Dr. Morrison continued. It's about a boy who grew up in poverty in the Bronx 35 years ago. His father died when he was 6, leaving his mother to raise him alone while working multiple jobs. This boy wore second-hand clothes that didn't fit quite right. He ate whatever free food was available. And when he got to middle school, a school much like this one, where he'd earned a scholarship through academic achievement, he was bullied relentlessly. Michael's head lifted slightly. Where was Dr. Morrison going with this? The other students mocked him for his clothes. They tripped him in hallways. They stole his homework. They excluded him from every social activity. And the teachers? Most of them looked the other way. They convinced themselves that if a student was having problems, it must be his own fault: poor social skills, bad attitude, inability to adapt. Dr. Morrison's voice grew harder. That boy was me. A collective gasp went through the auditorium. Michael's eyes widened in shock. Yes, I was that boy. I know exactly what it feels like to be judged not for your character or your intelligence or your potential, but for something completely out of your control: your economic circumstances. I know what it's like to be invisible, to be treated as less than because your shoes are worn or your lunch comes from a program designed to help you. He paused, and in that moment, the prestigious board chairman disappeared, replaced by the vulnerable child he'd once been. Even the usually boisterous students sat in stunned silence. I was lucky. One teacher saw past my circumstances and recognized my potential. She advocated for me, mentored me, helped me earn a scholarship to college. Without her, I wouldn't be standing here today. I certainly wouldn't be in a position to oversee an institution as prestigious as Westfield Academy." Dr. Morrison's gaze swept over the audience again, this time settling briefly on Principal Patterson and Mrs. Henderson, who both looked like they wanted to disappear. "But let me tell you something else about this school, something many of you don't know. 10 years ago, Westfield Academy was on the brink of collapse. We were facing bankruptcy. We were about to lose our accreditation. The beautiful buildings you see today were falling apart. The programs you enjoy were about to be cut. This school was dying. Now he had everyone's complete attention. Do you know what saved us? It wasn't wealthy benefactors or corporate donations, though those came later. It was ordinary people from this neighborhood, market vendors, shop owners, working families who pooled their money together because they believed this community needed a good school. They donated money they could barely afford to spare. They organized fundraisers. They fought to keep these doors open." Michael felt his grandmother squeeze his hand gently. "And one of the leaders of that grassroots effort is sitting in this auditorium right now." Dr. Morrison gestured toward Dorothy. "Mrs. Dorothy Parker, please stand." Dorothy rose slowly, her face composed despite the hundreds of eyes suddenly fixed on her. Michael looked up at his grandmother in amazement. He'd never known this story. Mrs. Parker organized market vendors and small business owners throughout this neighborhood. She personally contributed money that represented a significant portion of her annual income money. She earned selling sandwiches and prepared meals from a market stall. She didn't do it for recognition or for a plaque on a wall. She did it because she believed every child in this community deserved access to quality education. Dr. Morrison's voice grew stronger. "And she continues to donate every year to our lunch assistance program, ensuring that students from struggling families can eat nutritious meals without shame. Her grandson, Michael Parker, attends this school on a full academic scholarship that he earned through his own merit, his own intelligence, his own hard work." Brandon Chen's smirk had vanished. He sat frozen in his seat, his face slowly reddening. "So I want everyone in this room to understand something very clearly." Dr. Morrison's voice was steel now. "The woman standing before you, and her grandson, are not charity cases. They are not burdens on this school. They are the very reason this school exists. Without people like them, Westfield Academy would be a memory, not an institution." The auditorium was so quiet that Michael could hear his own heartbeat. "Yet I've learned that Michael has been subjected to constant bullying and discrimination. He's been mocked for his clothes, for his free lunch, for his economic circumstances. He's been physically assaulted. Yes, assaulted during athletic tryouts. His academic work has been sabotaged. And most shamefully, teachers and administrators have either participated in this mistreatment or turned a blind eye to it." Principal Patterson looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Several parents in the back shifted uncomfortably. "This ends today." Dr. Morrison's words rang out with absolute authority. From this moment forward, any student found bullying another student for any reason, economic status, race, religion, ability, or any other characteristic will face immediate suspension and possible expulsion. Any teacher or staff member who witnesses bullying and fails to intervene will face disciplinary action up to and including termination. He paused, letting that sink in. "But more than that, I want this to be a teaching moment. Wealth is not a measure of character. Poverty is not a moral failing. The ability to buy expensive clothes or the latest technology does not make you a better person. It just makes you luckier. And luck can change in an instant." Dr. Morrison's gaze swept across the students. "Some of you have been cruel to Michael. You've made his life miserable for no reason other than that. He reminded you of something uncomfortable, that not everyone has the privileges you take for granted. But I'm giving you a chance to do better. To be better. He looked directly at the section where Brandon and his friends sat. Real strength isn't about putting others down. It's about lifting them up. Real confidence doesn't require you to mock someone else's circumstances. And true character reveals itself in how you treat people who can't do anything for you. Michael watched as several students, including some who'd laughed at him, now looked down at their hands in shame. This school was saved by ordinary people doing extraordinary things. We owe Mrs. Parker and others like her an environment where all students are valued, respected, and given equal opportunity to succeed. If we can't provide that, then we don't deserve to exist. Dr. Morrison's final words echoed through the auditorium. You all have a choice to make about the kind of community you want this to be. Choose wisely. He stepped back from the podium. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the auditorium, a single person began to clap. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet, applauding not politely, but with genuine enthusiasm. Students clapped, parents clapped, even the teachers joined in. Dorothy stood there, tears streaming down her face, as hundreds of people gave her a standing ovation. Michael looked at his grandmother and saw her in a completely new light. She wasn't just the woman who raised him and sold sandwiches at the market. She was a hero. She'd saved this school. She'd saved him. As the applause finally died down and people began to file out, something remarkable happened. Students who'd never spoken to Michael before approached him. "Michael, I'm sorry," one girl said quietly. "I never said anything when they were mean to you. That was wrong." "Yeah, man, I'm sorry too," a boy added. "That wasn't cool what happened to you." Even some of Brandon's usual crowd approached hesitantly, mumbling apologies. But Brandon himself stood frozen in place, his face a mixture of shame and shock. Then, slowly, Brandon walked over. Michael tensed, expecting one final insult. Instead, Brandon held out his hand. "I'm sorry, Michael. For all of it. What I did. It was wrong. Really wrong." Michael looked at the extended hand for a long moment. Part of him wanted to reject it, to tell Brandon that sorry wasn't enough. But he also saw something genuine in Brandon's expression, real remorse, not just fear of punishment. He took Brandon's hand. Okay. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a start. The days following the assembly brought changes to Westfield Academy that no one could have predicted. It started small, a student sitting next to Michael at lunch, another asking to be his partner for a class project. But gradually, something fundamental shifted in the school's culture. Principal Patterson and Mrs. Henderson weren't fired, but they were placed on probation and required to undergo extensive training on equity and inclusion. Dr. Morrison made it clear that one more incident would end their careers at Westfield. More importantly, new policies were implemented. The school established an anonymous reporting system for bullying. They hired a full-time counselor specifically to address issues of discrimination and create support systems for scholarship students. And they began actively recruiting more socioeconomically diverse students rather than relying almost exclusively on wealthy families. For Michael, the change was profound but sometimes awkward. Students who'd ignored or mocked him for 2 years were now trying to befriend him. He appreciated the effort, but it was hard to forget the past so quickly. Brandon Chen surprised everyone, including Michael, by becoming one of his most consistent allies. It turned out that Brandon had been under enormous pressure from his parents to maintain status among the wealthy students, to network with the right people, to establish connections that would help him later in life. After the assembly, his parents had been mortified by his behavior and had serious conversations with him about values and character. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the assembly, Brandon approached Michael in the library. "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" Michael looked up from his homework. "Sure." Brandon sat down, looking uncomfortable. I've been thinking a lot about everything. And I wanted to say that I'm not just sorry for what I did to you. I'm trying to understand why I did it. Michael put down his pen, genuinely curious now. And? I think I was scared, Brandon admitted. Scared that if I didn't put you down, people might look at me differently. Like maybe I wasn't as secure in my position as I pretended to be. And taking out my insecurity on you was easier than dealing with my own stuff. It was the most honest thing Brandon had ever said to him. That doesn't excuse what you did. I know, but I'm trying to be better. My parents made me volunteer at a community center in a lower-income neighborhood. At first, I hated it, thought they were just punishing me. But I met these kids who are so smart, so talented, working twice as hard as I ever have because they don't have the advantages I take for granted. It made me realize how messed up my perspective was. Michael considered this. So what now? Now I'm trying to actually be the person I pretended to be, someone worthy of respect, not because of my parents' money but because of how I treat people. Brandon paused. I know we might never be real friends. But I hope someday you can forgive me. Michael thought about his grandmother, about Dr. Morrison, about second chances. I think people can change if they really want to. So yeah, maybe someday. Brandon smiled, a real smile, not the mocking smirk Michael was used to. That's fair. After Brandon left, Michael realized something important. He'd spent so long feeling powerless, like he was a victim of circumstances he couldn't control. But standing up for himself, with his grandmother's help, had changed something fundamental. He wasn't powerless. He had a voice. And people would listen. That evening, Michael and Dorothy sat together in their small apartment, sharing dinner as always. But tonight felt different. Grandma, why didn't you ever tell me about what you did for the school? Dorothy smiled. Because I didn't do it for recognition, baby. I did it because it was the right thing to do. That school needed help, and I was in a position to give it, even if it meant sacrificing some things. But you gave so much. Money we could have used for what? Nicer clothes? A bigger apartment? Dorothy shook her head. Those things don't matter nearly as much as making sure kids in our community had opportunities. Including you. Michael felt his eyes well up. I'm so proud to be your grandson. And I'm so proud of you. Dorothy reached across the table and took his hand. You could have become bitter and angry after everything you went through. Instead, you stayed kind. You stayed focused on your education. You never lost sight of who you are. That takes real strength. I learned it from you. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, then Dorothy spoke again. You know what the best part of all this is? It's not just that things are better for you now. It's that they'll be better for other kids too. The next scholarship student who comes to Westfield won't have to go through what you did. That's real change. Michael nodded, realizing she was right. His suffering hadn't been meaningless if it led to a better environment for others. The next month brought even more changes. Dr. Morrison established a new scholarship fund specifically for students from working-class families, ensuring that Westfield would have economic diversity among its student body. He also instituted a community service requirement: every student had to volunteer at least 20 hours per year. In lower-income neighborhoods, building empathy and understanding. Most surprisingly, he asked Dorothy to join the school's board of advisors. At first, she was hesitant. What did a market vendor know about running a prestigious academy? But Dr. Morrison insisted that was exactly the perspective they needed. You know better than any of us what families in this community need, he told her. Your voice is essential. So Dorothy joined the board, and suddenly decisions at Westfield Academy were being made with input from someone who understood what it was like to struggle, to sacrifice, to make impossible choices between different necessities. As spring turned to summer, Michael reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. He'd gone from being the school's invisible outcast to having friends, respect, and a voice that mattered. Brandon had become, if not a close friend, at least someone Michael could trust and work with on group projects without fear. More importantly, Michael had learned something crucial about power and change. He'd always thought that power came from money or position or popularity. But real power came from courage, the courage to stand up for yourself, to tell the truth. Even when it was uncomfortable, to refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. His grandmother had shown him that. She'd walked into that school with nothing but truth and dignity, and she'd changed everything. On the last day of school, there was a ceremony recognizing students who'd made significant contributions to the school community. Michael wasn't surprised when they called Dorothy's name and presented her with a plaque honoring her years of support. The applause was genuine and warm. But then they called Michael's name too. Michael Parker, Dr. Morrison announced, for academic excellence, resilience in the face of adversity. And for reminding us all of the true values that should define our community. As Michael walked to the stage to accept his certificate, he looked out at the assembled students and saw something he'd never seen before: genuine respect. Not because of his clothes or his economic status, but because of who he was as a person. Brandon led the applause, standing up and getting others to their feet. Soon the entire auditorium was standing, clapping for Michael, the scholarship student who'd endured so much and emerged stronger. Later, as Michael and Dorothy walked home together, he asked her, "Do you think things will stay different? Or will people forget and go back to how they were?" Dorothy considered the question carefully. Some people will forget. Some will slide back into old habits. But enough people will remember, enough people have changed that it won't ever be exactly the same. You planted seeds, Michael. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. Those seeds will grow. She was right, Michael realized. The school wasn't perfect now, it probably never would be. But it was better. And better was good enough to build on. As they reached their apartment building, Michael turned to his grandmother. "Thank you, Grandma, for everything. For raising me, for working so hard, for standing up for me. For teaching me how to stand up for myself." Dorothy pulled him into a hug. "You never have to thank me for loving you, baby. That's what family does. We show up. We fight for each other. We don't give up. I love you, Grandma. I love you too, Michael. So much." That night, Michael lay in bed thinking about the journey he'd been on from being the invisible, bullied scholarship student to someone who'd helped change an entire school's culture. It hadn't been easy. There had been times when he'd wanted to give up, to accept that this was just how things were and would always be. But he hadn't given up. And neither had his grandmother. Together, they'd proven that ordinary people could make extraordinary changes. Tomorrow, summer vacation would begin. In the fall, Michael would return to Westfield Academy as an 8th grader. But he wouldn't be returning as the same person who'd endured so much cruelty. He'd be returning as someone who knew his worth, who had allies and friends, who understood that silence in the face of injustice only allows injustice to continue. Most importantly, he'd be returning to a school that was slowly learning to value character over wealth, compassion over status, and humanity over privilege. It wasn't a perfect ending. But it was a new beginning.